what is the church? And they continue to steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread and in prayers. Acts chapter 2, verse 42. I should like to consider with you the second chapter of the book of Acts, and in particular the 42nd verse, because here we are presented with a picture of the early Christian church. In other words, I want us to look at the nature of the church, the doctrine of the church. I do this because I believe there is an urgent need to consider this subject at this present time. And there are many compelling reasons for studying this doctrine. All these are obvious practical reasons why we should be considering together the doctrine of the nature of the Christian church. But over and above all these considerations is the fact that the New Testament itself gives such great prominence to this doctrine. And there is a sense in which it is true to say that every single New Testament epistle is really concerned with it. And most of the difficulties that arose in the early church were due to the failure on the part of the people to realize this particular doctrine. Take, for instance, the first epistle to the Corinthians. This is what you may call an omnibus letter, a letter in which the Apostle Paul deals with a variety of problems that has arisen in the church. But in essence, he says that there is only one cause for all the problems, and that is that the people have failed to realize the nature of the church. Look at the first problem he addresses. The church is divided into groups and factions, which have formed themselves around the personalities of certain preachers. One person says, I am of Paul. Another, I am of Apollos. A third, I of Cephas, and so on. What is the cause of that disunity? It is, says the apostle, that they have never understood that the church is the body of Christ. Is Christ divided? Paul asks, were ye baptized in the name of Paul? They would be incapable of these factions if they realized the true nature of the church. And then Paul goes on to deal with many other problems. The incestuous person, for example, when he deals with that problem in the same way, he says, know ye not that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump? 1 Corinthians 5 verse 6. The church is like a loaf of a mass of dough with leaven in it. And because that is the nature of the Christian church, if you get evil in it, that evil will permeate the whole of its life. Then the apostle talks of how the church members were quarreling with one another, and even taking their quarrels to the public law courts. And he is astonished at this. He says, in essence, you do not seem to realize what a church is. Why do you not appoint one of the lowliest members of the church to make a decision in these matters? 1 Corinthians 6 verse 4. When he goes on to deal with the questions of unconverted husbands or wives and the position of children, he uses the same argument. And when Paul comes to the question of the more enlightened brethren, the stronger and the weaker brethren, and the way they are quarreling, he deals with that too in exactly the same manner. And then you come to the next question, that of spiritual gifts. how Christians are vying with one another, and some boasting of more spectacular gifts and despising others, and those with the lesser gifts feeling envious of those with the greater ones. There is terrible confusion in the church, and again the apostle deals with it in the same way. He says, "Ye are the body of Christ," and members in particular. 1 Corinthians 12, verse 27. The whole trouble is due to the fact that they have never realized the true nature of the Christian church. Now, Paul's exhortations to the church in Corinth are just one example from the New Testament. In all these epistles, this great doctrine is taken up in the same way because it is absolutely crucial. And I have a feeling that somehow or another we have been neglecting this teaching. We have been talking about certain aspects without considering the vital doctrine itself. The question is, how do we approach this doctrine of the nature of the church? And there are certain important negatives. One fatal method is just to start from where we are and to see what modifications or accommodations we can make in order somehow to arrive at a church. Now that is exactly what is being done by the ecumenical movement. It starts from the present position, and then it more or less asks the question at the different sections of the church to make certain modifications, perhaps even compromises, in order to produce one great world church. This is the kind of approach that is found in great business, when for certain reasons they deem it wise to amalgamate. But that, I suggest, is a false way of facing the problem of the church. I venture to suggest also that another false way is to go back into history. Many tend to this at the present time. There is a great value in history, and we can learn much from it. But there is a danger that if you merely go back to the origins of the different sections of the Christian church, you may end by hardening the positions. And people will develop a denominational spirit that is inimical to true unity. And we shall be fighting for our own traditions. This has happened frequently. Nothing has been so pathetic and tragic in the history of the church as denominational fighting and quarreling, the jealousy and the envy. My church, my denomination, must be better than the one down the street, and so on. And many people are quite unaware of the real truth concerning their own denomination, and they contend for their branch of the church because they belong to it. But why do they belong to it? Large numbers have no idea. It is simply an accident that their parents happened to belong to it, and they were brought up in it. But this is how carnality comes in. And even history can be abused by us in this particular way. We can learn from history, but we must not become slaves even to history. Tradition is good, traditionalism is very bad. An even worse approach is one that, it seems to me, is creeping in very rapidly. And that is to take a kind of a Gallup poll to find out what the people want. This has become quite prominent in recent years. The church asks, what do people actually want? What do they like? What do they think? And we pander to them. We can say that people do not like much preaching, so we will preach shorter sermons. But they do like more of something else, so we give them more of that. The church allows the word and the pew, perhaps, to determine what is to be the truth. Now, all these approaches are surely quite wrong. There is only one thing to do as we face this issue, and that is to go back to the New Testament itself. It is here and here alone that we discover what the Christian church really is. And there is this fatal tendency in all of us to turn that which is true into something that is false. I never shall forget, as long as I live, a phrase I once read in a little book on Protestantism, written by the late Dean Inge. Of all men, the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. I have forgotten everything in the book except the first sentence, and this is it. Every institution tends to produce its opposite, and his whole thesis is that by now even Protestantism has become something that is almost a negation of itself. If you analyze the life and the history of the great denominations, you will find that this is true of practically all of them. They have become something that is almost the exact opposite of what their founders believed in and did. So it is our duty to go back to the New Testament itself. Let's go right back to the beginning. This is most important at this moment. What is the church? What is the church? And the only authority on this question is that which we find in the New Testament. In particular, in the second chapter of the book of Acts, we have the account of the origin of the Christian church. This is what the church is meant to be. This is what the church has always become in periods of reformation and of revival. It is commonplace to say that every period of true revival and reawakening is nothing but a return to the condition of the book of Acts. The only hope for the church is to get back to this. And the only hope for the world that is hurtling itself to hell is that the church should again become what she was in her origin. So I invite you to look at this picture with me. What is a church?